IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Rohan Seth and I am here with Prateek Waghre, a good friend and colleague. And I think it's been a while since we've done this. So welcome to All Things Policy, Prateek.
Thanks, Rohan, although you said this just last week.
Did I? Well, on that note, let's begin this one because I have been bombarded with news on Apple doing things to iCloud photos. Now, as someone who is very invested in Apple products and also in the services that they offer, I have always found Apple to be like, if I own an Apple phone, I don't actually worry about the privacy of a lot of these things. And I think this is an excellent point to start off this conversation because recently Apple has said that it will be taking some action as it pertains to iCloud photos, and it might have some privacy compromising implications. So, Prateek, tell me what exactly has happened.
Sure. So let me keep it, let's keep it high level to start with, and then we'll get into the weeds as the conversation progresses, because that's bound to happen as we unpack these things, right? So last week they announced 3 new capabilities, right, if I can call them that. And to start with, these are going to be US only, and we'll have to see how it rolls out to other countries. But they basically, the 3 things were, first was communication safety in messages, which essentially had tools that were going to warn children and their parents when children were receiving or sending sexually explicit photos. Right. The second was CSAM detection, and that's essentially going to be based off new updates to iOS, which will allow Apple to detect known CSAM, child sexual abuse material images that would be stored in iCloud photos. And the third and the least controversial of the lot is some form of expanding guidance in Siri and search, which is essentially if people are searching for resources on how to stay safe online, it will point them to resources from partners. Or if people are actually engaging in searches that relate to CSAM, it's going to intervene and tell them that this topic is harmful and problematic, etc. Right? So that's the gist of it. We'll get into them. The third, like I said, is the least controversial of the lot. I expect we'll be talking a lot more about the first 2.
Right. So actually, let's go ahead and talk about those things, right? So Apple has said, and I will elaborate on NECMEC later, but it's an organization that deals with child abuse. And it has said that it will partner with NECMEC and it will create, and there's a lot of technical terms here, so I'll talk about it will create hashed images and so on to detect whether or not your iCloud drive has, or your iCloud photo library has particular photos that it can act upon. Right. So, Prateek, tell me first, why is this antithetical to privacy? And why has Apple come ahead and do this now? So, yeah, those 2 questions.
I'm going to sidestep the privacy question for just a second, because it's actually it's a more thorny question than we would think, right? But as you said, right, and this is the second of the 3 features that we spoke about, and so there is essentially a cryptographic hash that's generated of known CSAM content, right? And what Apple is choosing to do is that as content is being uploaded from a person's phone or iPad to iCloud photos, that's when it's going to essentially do a local comparison, right, to see whether these images share hashes with anything that's in the NECMEC database, right? Now, a lot of this already happens today. It happens in the cloud, right? So if you're using any other services to store your photos online, this is already happening in the cloud. This is a requirement of US law, right? And as things, as our internet, as big tech companies, and even though I don't like that term, big tech companies tend to be all in the US. Most of the content that we deal with today, most of the photos that we upload, do go through these checks already, right? But the difference with the way Apple seems to have gone about it is that it's going to do this match, going to do this search or the database matching or this hash matching locally. Now, organizations like the EFF have come out against client-side scanning, right? And they've always been against this approach. Now, they argue that it is privacy compromising in the sense that it takes away from one of the promises of end-to-end encrypted messaging, which is that no one outside the sender and the receiver has any knowledge of the contents of the message, right? Because if you are able to match a cryptographic hash, it means you have a third party has some idea of it, even though the way the local matching takes away the need to share this data with Apple directly. But that's where uh, that concern is alleviated to some extent. But the other point that they argue is that look, once you have the system in place, right? Once you have the system in place, there is no limit on what it can be used for, right? Because as a device owner, now look, very few device owners are actually going to be able to reverse engineer their device to see what these hashes are. But even if you get to that stage, all you're looking at is a hash. Now you don't know whether this hash is then looking at specifically matching for CSAM content or other types of content that the system may be applied to in the future, right? As of now, Apple says it doesn't. In one of the FAQs, they even said they do not have the ability to add. They don't have the ability to add more cryptographic hashes to it. But things can change.
Right. I have a few things to say to that. I think there is, first of all, I think there is a huge ethical conversation to be had here. And you and I both know that we like having these ethical conversations in the GCPP Tech and Policy program. So if you are still here, dear listener, please do check out because the new cohort starts 4th of September. But that plug aside, let me talk a little bit more about what you said there. Right. So according to the people that have been briefed on the plans, every photo uploaded in the iCloud in the US will be given a safety voucher saying whether or not it's suspect. Right? Once a certain number of photos are marked as suspect, Apple will enable all suspect photos to be decrypted, and if one of them is a match or if one of them is illegal, it will be passed on to the relevant authorities. Right. So now people have raised concerns, as you said. One of them is Johns Hopkins University professor and cryptographer Matthew Green, who said that this sort of tool sort of can be a boon for finding child pornography in people's phones. Right. But it could also be very dangerous in the hands of an authoritarian government. Right. So even if you believe that Apple won't allow these tools to be misused, there's still a lot to be concerned about because these systems rely on a database of problematic media hashes that you, as you said, as a consumer, can't review. So talk to me about what this means, I would say, for other countries when and how Apple might be managing trade-offs there.
Yeah, so it's very common to bring China into the conversation, right? As the model authoritarian state, and and I think that's a valid concern. There is one thing to keep in mind, though, that a lot of a lot of these companies have different ways to deal with China. They have different infrastructure, etc. No, I'm not arguing on the larger principle that you probably shouldn't compromise these values anywhere. But a lot of these corporations have made their peace with the fact that to operate in China, they need to make certain compromises, and they've taken measures to restrict the fallout of that into the rest of the world. Right, but in this case, China isn't the only concern. Right, there is legislation or there are proposals in other countries as well to proactively monitor for CSAM content, right? Which today is not the case. It's again, so to start with, I think with the current wording of US law, once you have knowledge of CSAM content, you need to act on it. You don't need to proactively look for it, right? But with the online harms, the framework in the US, I believe even the EU is considering something like this. Australia also has their version of online harms. All of them allude to some form of proactive monitoring of proactive obligation to monitor this type of content, right? So it looks like we're headed that way, and maybe this is Apple's way of getting ahead of some of that. we'll have to see, right? Even in India, right? Back in, I think this was Jan 2020, there was an ad hoc committee that submitted a report to the Rajya Sabha. There was an ad hoc Rajya Sabha committee that came out with a report on protecting children from this sort of exploitation. And that report, among the many things that it argued, did ask for things like, look, intermediaries should be made responsible, ISPs should be made liable, right? The central government should have the authority to block websites and intermediaries that carry CSAM content through, in quotes, designated authority, even though it didn't say what that authority was. And it asked for law enforcement agencies to be able to break end-to-end encryption to be able to trace distributors, right? And if you look at the IT rules, there is a traceability requirement, right? Now, although there's a very careful play of words, they're saying that, look, hey, we're not asking you to break encryption, but we want traceability of messages, right? And there is also wording about proactive monitoring and removal of content, right? I'm unsure of how that translates exactly into CSAM with the current wording of the IT rules, but the words proactive monitoring are there, right? So there is potential for this to be applied to different geography. And more importantly, right, I think the signaling from someone like Apple doing this is also significant, because again, look, in India, in terms of market share, Apple is not significant, right? But in terms of the path it sets technology companies on, that is something to watch out for. And Apple sort of unilaterally doing this, how that affects, what sort of pressures will that lead to on the likes of WhatsApp, Signal, etc., is something we'll have to watch out for, right? Because I think it's logical to expect that is going to follow from various governments who want government and well-intentioned people who want to deal with the very serious problem of CSAM content. They are going to ask that, hey, look, Apple is doing this, why don't you do this, right? And that's where it becomes tricky. And there's also the slippery slope problem, which we'll get into, I guess.
I think that's very, very well put. I have a few questions that I want to talk to you about, but before we can get into those, let's take a quick commercial break.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Naan Curry, Sadaf and Archit stir up a hot pot of stories exploring the age-old breakfast of Old Delhi Nihari. This is a must-check out from the #1 food podcast in India. We'd like to welcome Audiogan to the network. It's an old show about design. We want to kick off this season with Jay Datta, design-headed Make My Trip and Go Ivy Bo. He's also the founder of Design Up. Positively Unlimited gets a makeover. Check out the revamped show Say No to Drama with Chetna and learn how to avoid drama in your life. Home is where the heart is. Marathi Kirkitun helps us understand more about homes. On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth asks the pertinent question, is jealousy good for you? And on the Musafir Stories, get introduced to the headhunters of Nagaland. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any other show for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth is the best way to spread the word about a podcast you love. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, See It, Cred, Global Victoria, Bank of Baroda, Intuit India, and CoinSwitch Kuber.
Hi, welcome back. We are here with Prateek talking about developments in Apple's new, I want to say, quote unquote, feature against child abuse. Prateek, I have a few thoughts, and I hope one of them will lead to a question. The first one is sort of Apple's stand, as you talked about. So Apple, it's significant that Apple's the company who's doing this because they are, of course, a leader in the space. By which I mean that privacy has been a fundamental value to Apple, at least as far as Tim Cook is concerned. It's also a fundamental human right. And he says that Apple also believes in that. Now, I have a reading list where one of the books that I read was one about Tim Cook, and it tells a lot about the values that he has, including the commitment to the environment, accessibility, privacy, and so on. Now, this sort of tells me that this might be a T point for privacy and for doing the right thing, because, of course, I think there are a lot of problems with speech on the internet, but I don't think there's any more severe than child abuse and child porn. Right. So do you also think that this is a T point? And following up with this, I think this is more of an observation. But there is every chance that if you have an iPhone, I don't know what the market share for Apple in India is. I don't know if it's significant or not, but I imagine it's a market that people look at quite closely because it's Apple, right? If you have an iPhone, there is a very high chance that you also have iCloud photos. I say that because iPhones themselves, it's generally a good idea to back up your phone. And Apple, for some reason, which is still very, very hard for me to understand, gives you just 5 gigabytes of storage. So the photos become better every year, the cameras become better every year, but you can only take like 4 of those photos and put them in your phone because iCloud storage is quite terrible at this. And so that little bit of a rant aside on my personal problems with iCloud photos, tell me, Prateek, do you see this as a T point for Apple and for privacy and security?
So let me take a second question first, right? Which is or a point on your second observation, which was about iCloud backup, right? So there's, and I think the overall point you made is right, right? That okay, even if it is Apple's market share somewhere in the low single figures in India, but iCloud Photos, which is different from iCloud backup per se, is again something that's enabled by default, right? A lot of people don't switch from default, right? So there is a good chance it is enabled. But the point about the the default 5 GB storage, I think that actually might work well in because I don't know if everyone actually goes and invests in extra storage, right? So maybe that will shave some people off who might be exposed to this, right? But to your first question of the T point for privacy, right? And I think that, and again, I tried to sidestep this earlier, but you came back to it anyway. Uh, the the thing about this is right. It now Apple has put out, I think, 3 white papers as well on the from different experts on this, right? Now, like I said, while EFF argues that it does violate privacy, right? I think at least Apple, in from their perspective, they probably believe that they've addressed a lot of those concerns by keeping this on device, so that look, Apple does not know exactly does not know every image that gets flagged, right? Unless it reaches a certain threshold. Now, case in point, we don't know what that threshold is, right? Even with the messages, the messages, messaging, the safety in messages, right? Feature which we actually haven't spoken too much about. Uh, Even in that case, what happens is that there is machine learning that's deployed on the device locally that tries to determine whether an image that's being shared has contain nudity or not, right? Now, and if it does, and if it's uh, tied to an iCloud account of a of a minor under 13 years of age, and also tied to an iCloud family account, that's when it will send a notification to the user directly saying that, hey, this message contains potentially contain nudity. Do you still want to view it? And if the user says yes, it also sends a notification to the registered parent account. Now, at all these points, again, Apple is not seeing those images, right? So from its perspective, it's tried to limit those privacy concerns. And I think we will keep debating that. I don't think that's a discussion that's going to stop anytime soon. What it certainly has affected, right, is agency, in the sense that as an individual, you have lesser and lesser control over what a device you have purchased does, right? Now this software is going to ship, right, with the next version of iOS and the next version of Mac OS. This capability is going to ship to devices. Now, you and I can potentially turn it off by saying, okay, look, I don't want iCloud photos, right? I'll just use local photos and back them up locally to my computer. That is one potential way of opting out of the CSAM detection feature, but I don't believe there's any way to opt out of the messages, the message capability. And note that it's not limited to iMessage per se, right? So it would apply even to your regular SMS text kind of messages. And there is, as far as I can tell, no way to turn any of those off, right? So it is certainly affecting agency, right? And which actually, in certain ways, if you look at it, is pretty on brand for Apple, because over the years you've had less and less control over what you could do with your own devices, right? Whether it's in terms of MacBook and the ability to upgrade RAM, right? Ever since they started gluing them on. So yeah, in certain ways, the reduction of agency is potentially on brand for Apple.
I'm quite glad that you ended with that tangent because I will confess to this. I think about a lot of meta tech things to put me to sleep at night. So, like one of them's what is a photo? Like if you've seen that new Google Photos feature that if you click 10 photos, it will generate an 11th photo for you without any eye blinks or whatnot. So, like, is that 11th photo a photo? Right? What like the very nature of these things is changing. So, like, one of the other things I think about is who owns your device, because I pay a lot. Like, people who buy iPhones, they shell out a lot of money on those devices, right? And it is striking to me that we are giving out a premium for less control over what our device can do. Like, for example, I think a lot about whether or not iPads would be more capable if Apple wasn't also the company making Macs, right? Because they both have the same chip now and so on. Like, there's a whole rabbit hole to go down here. What I'm basically trying to ask you, Prateek, is that does this sort of mean that you own your device a little less now?
I mean, yes, and I think that is potentially part of the trade-off, right? And when you enter Apple ecosystem, at least ever since the iPhone OS, then iOS era, right? In the sense that you couldn't sideload applications and things like that, right? That had its advantages, right? In many ways, in the sense that look, if you're not sideloading apps and you're potentially lowering the risk to malicious apps, even though there is that whole epic Apple thing which disproved some of these claims from Apple, at least to a certain extent, right? But the fact that not every app has full control over what it can do on your device has some advantages, right? Now we're seeing this go the other way, right? In the sense that until now it was in these sort of restrictions were in ways that you could argue that it benefited the user, or the individual user. In this case, it's not necessarily benefiting an individual user, but Apple can still make the case that it is benefiting society as a whole, right? If it's helping address the problem related to CSAM, then they can make that argument. So this is not going to be a black and white conversation by any means, but it goes back to everything we talk about in technology policy, right? It's all about trade-offs. It's always about massive trade-offs, and this is just one of those that so from my sense, right, judging by the number of reactions I've seen on Twitter, seems to have taken a lot of people by surprise, right? So it doesn't seem like a good a number of, I guess, industry insiders, if I can call them that, were necessarily aware of this before it came out, right? Because there appear to have been some proposals and some conversations happening on the sidelines, and then out of nowhere, Apple unilaterally comes out with this with this new approach, and that just shifts the whole conversation into what the future is, right? And in dealing with this trade-off between, hey, how do we address or limit the harms coming out of CSAM content versus the how it can be abused, how it affects individual liberty, how it affects privacy, right? And how you prevent a slippery slope, right? Because I think, and I'm going to make up words here, but as slippery slopes go, this is amongst the slipperer or the slipperiest of slopes that could be.
I think on that extremely novel note, I'm going to call it, I think we can bring this to a close. But thank you, Prateek. I think this is not the last time that we'll be talking about this. There's plenty more to come here. So thank you for joining us, and hope you have a nice day.
Thanks, Ron.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, If you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Remember the days when our granny used to narrate once upon a time stories? Let's bring back the good old days of moral stories with Storytime Tamil. Hi, I am Ravishankar Balachandran, host of Storytime Tamil podcast. I would like you to entertain and educate your children with stories from Storytime Tamil. Tune in to the new episode sharp at 7 p.m. every day on IVM website, IVM podcast app, YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast from.
सफर, रास्ते, मंजिल और मुकाम अक्सर ये हमसे कुछ कहना चाहते हैं, पर हम हैं कि अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में इन्हें सुनने से कतराते हैं। नमस्ते दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है केशव चतुर्वेदी और मैं आपको ले चलूंगा कुछ ऐसे सफर पर जहां आपको एक नया नजरिया मिलेगा सफर और मंजिलों को देखने का। आइए इन किस्से कहानियों में डूब जाएं। हर मंगलवार और शुक्रवार